Hi, I'm Helena from Dreamweaver Jewellery. So I've got this beautiful multicoloured tiger's eye to do today. I tend to use half round copper wire. This is 0.5mm 21 gauge I think. And I just take off one round of that little reel there, and you can see it's flat on one side. I've also got 3 square wires that are 0.8mm, which is 20 gauge. I'm rubbish with gauges, I am British after all. So we're going to find the approximate centre and then we're going to weave around, keeping the flat side of that half round to the square wires. So if you're not sure how long your base wires need to be, I tend to measure the stone, and this was about 1 inch tall, and then I add about 6 inches either side and 1 or 2 for good luck. So what's that, 12, 13, about 15-ish inches is usually about right. For a 1 inch stone, that is. Okay, so we're just nearing the end of this simple bit of weaving. This is going to be the bottom V, and it needs to be right in the centre of those base wires. And we're just going to compress them all down with the nylon pliers. Push those together neatly, make sure they're not coming astray. And then I like to just unwind one, and then you're going to clip it off in the middle of those base wires, and we'll do the same on the other side. I decided to film a little bit further away today and work pretty much at my regular speed. So if you've been following me, you'll have seen a few of my other videos, and this bit is a bit tedious if you've seen it loads of times before, so apologies if you needed it a bit slower. I do have plenty of other videos you could watch in the beginner series to sort of see how to do that part. So I'm also back to my favourite wire supplier now, so you can see these are actually straightening out so much easier than that horrible bendy wire that I kept moaning about in the last few videos. So we'll just take our flat pliers, and in the approximate just off centre you need to just start making a V and pop the stone in and just kind of gauge where these legs of the wires are going to bend upwards. This stone I hadn't looked at very carefully, and it wasn't actually perfectly symmetrical. One side was very slightly higher than the other, which gave me a couple of problems. So in that instance, all you've got to do really is try and make the eye shape still symmetrical as possible, and we just have to very slightly modify the design to try and accommodate, but actually in the end this looked pretty symmetrical, so it wasn't a really big problem. Here I'm just making sure all of these 3 wires sit one on top of the other and they don't cross over, because you don't want anything to cross, and then we're just going to draw those over to try and make that eye shape a little bit more symmetrical. When you fiddle with it and you're happy with the shape, you can go ahead and just crimp those wires at the top where they're crossed, and this just gives you like a beginning point of where to start your bail. If you're not sure what a bail is, basically that's the loop that your chain goes through. Just adjusting here again because these wires are trying to go out of shape, and we'll just pop the stone in and see where we're at shape wise. You can see here the left side was ended up a little bit higher. I think that's because the stone isn't perfectly symmetrical. Either that or I just cocked that up. So I went back in with my pliers and just readjusted that one. If you're a beginner and you're struggling with this, the easiest way to do it is on a flat surface, and I still had a very slight adjustment to make just to make sure that that shape was symmetrical. That's better. It's difficult to hold it all together on camera. So let's just straighten out those wires a little bit again, make sure they're all sitting nicely because I crushed them a little bit. So here I've got some 0.4mm weaving wire that I popped on a bobbin. It was probably 2 or 3 metres long. I don't tend to measure how much I put on, I just put on how much I know I need from experience, so I mean that comes with time. Just wind a load on and then you've got some to play with. So I'm just taking the back left frame wire and I'm just wrapping around that 3 times. Looks like I'm poking myself in the eye there as well. Let's go ahead and snip that little tail end off and press it back to the frame with our little flat pliers. These are the Jewellery combination pliers, the 485C. I do quite like those because they're nice and neat and flat on the inside. So you can see I've slid those up now to where the start of the bail meets. And we're going to just line those pairs of 3 wires up either side and wrap around a couple of times just to secure them together. I decided at this point I was going to do a woven bail, so I took the first frame wire, the one at the top, on each side and just pulled them down, and that tends to hold the eye shape in place for you. We're going to use 2 wires on either side to kind of make this pretty bail, so you want to just arrange them gently, and I'm just going to weave over just once in a figure 8 pattern on either side for about 3 or 4 rounds. So you're not wrapping all the way around, you're doing like a half round wrap, trying to get it to focus, and then back the opposite way. I just like to start any figure 8 weave like that. It's a new thing I've discovered. I just find it a little bit more helpful to keep those weaves pressed down when you're first starting. So to continue this weave, we're just going to ignore the outside wire for a moment, and we're going to wrap round 3 times on the inner wire, and on the 3rd wrap you're going to cross over and carry on with your figure 8 weave. Now just grab my pliers here and push them right down on those wires to keep the weave together. You don't need to grip with your pliers when you do that, you're basically just kind of placing them around the base wire to get in there and push the weave down the base wire. So 3 wraps around that, and on the return journey you're going to go across to the other side. And again, it's really important at the base to make sure those weaves are really pressed down into position. So another 3 wraps on this side. And 3 more on the left hand side. So this time we're going to fasten those 2 outer wires together as if they're a conjoined pair, and we're going to go round those twice and then back up through the middle of them and round that inner wire once and back across in the figure 8 motion. So on the other side then, 2 around the outer wire again and through the middle, so you've got 1 and back across to the other side. I do like to get my nylon pliers out here and press it all flat because this will twist a little bit on you. So just keep pressing it flat every couple of times and you'll find it's getting a bit easier. It's always trickier at the bottom. Once you've got going a bit, it stabilises it and it's much easier to do. So now we're going to ignore the outer wires again and just do 2 lots of the 3 wraps on both sides. So essentially you should see 6 loops around either side of the wire before you do the next bit. So now we're going to include the outer wire again, so 2 round that one and come up through the middle and 1 round the other before drawing it down the middle into your figure 8 pattern. Same again, 2 round the outers, through the middle. I have to keep pushing them down if I've tightened them together a little bit too much, which I had there. And then Pliers again, give it a squidge. And we're just going to repeat this pattern now until you've done one more repeat until you get to the 2 outer wires. So now we need to start bending these outer wires back in a symmetrical shape, and where just about they're going to meet, we're just going to bend them back out again. My symmetry was absolutely rubbish today. I don't know what I'm playing at. They were really out, so I'm just going to re-straighten those and try again. I'm having a very, very blonde day today. Everything's gone wrong, so apologies if my filming is absolutely dire. At least you see how to correct things, I suppose. Anyway, we're going to repeat this weave, but when you start going back down this shape, you will find that everything starts to slip off to the left, and it's a bit of a nuisance. So to get round that, you're going to have to notice that I keep my right index finger just behind the weave pretty much at all times, and you'll see me keep moving and twisting position to make sure they stay exactly where I put them. You also need to leave your tension a little bit looser when you go across the weave, as in the long bit in the middle, because all that happens otherwise is you don't leave enough space for the weave to be able to kind of wind around that wire. As it's coming back down again, you will find that you need just a little bit extra, so you can twist this wire, this particular wire here. When you go onto that loop, you need to kind of push it back in again, if that makes sense. If you put your normal tension on here, all that would happen is your shape will pull inwards and you'll start having like a skinny weird bit, and it won't look as nice. So really take your time doing this. There's no rush. Make sure every single weave is exactly where you want it, and you're holding it in place with that finger before you move on to the next one. It's much easier to do it at this stage rather than get halfway through and then realise you've made a bit of a hash of it. Your weaving wire is also quite delicate, so if you do unweave it and have to kind of do it again, you may find it snaps on you, which is even more of a pain because you'll have to put another piece on, and it just never looks quite as nice. So really do take your time with your weaving and get it the best you can get it, and that's how you get good at doing the weaving side of things. Practice makes perfect. I hope you'll also notice how often I readjust and keep making sure that every weave is squished down, and I'm holding them all in place between finger and thumb on the right hand. That will help you on this return journey because it is tricky, especially as you start getting towards where the 2 wires meet. That is quite difficult. So when you've got as far as you can get, we're going to start like we did at the bottom of the weave, and we're just going to go back and forward like a half loop, oops, each time, just to finish it off. Like I said earlier, I just find this is a really neat way to finish it. I've only recently kind of started doing this. I just find it sits a bit nicer than trying to continue the weave and it all open out and look a bit scrappy. So we're just going to go all the way to the end. can see how lovely and neat that looks at the top. Quite happy with that. So now we're going to just go round one of the inner wires 3 times to fasten off. It doesn't really matter which. I don't know if you see my other videos, but I tend to hold the wire right at the bottom and twiddle it around a few times, and that snaps it off. And sometimes it's just easier than getting in with your flush cutters. It doesn't leave a sharp point. And there's our beautiful woven bail. So my framer got a bit battered, so I'm just holding it at the bottom V here and kind of curling it around with the nylon pliers to make sure those wires are sitting nice and neatly next to each other. So let's just pull the bail forward slightly. Now I'm going to form this one with my fingers, because sometimes when you use too many things to bend it round, you can damage the weave. So just keep adjusting it until the base of those wires meet the bottom of the bail. Please ignore the top at this stage. I changed my mind putting the bail wires through the frame, but everything else is relevant here. So basically the front V was sitting a little bit askew, so I decided to unwrap a couple and snip them off just to make it level again. So I'll just snip that little tail wire off and readjust it, and then hopefully it will look nice and level again. That's better. So we're going to signal the bail wires for now, and I'm going to set the stone. So you get the back inner cradle wire and you're going to just bend that inwards. I decided to come a little bit further up on this stone because it's quite a tall stone and it's very sharp sided. It was a strange cut, this stone. It didn't fit all that nicely because it was kind of very sharp outwards and no curves, if that makes sense. So I'm just fiddling with this to try and make it a little bit more symmetrical and look nice and neat from the back. So once you're happy with it, you can test fit your stone. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage because basically we're just going to mildly set it and make sure the wires are pretty much where we want them to be before we continue. So we're going to lift that inner wire on the front there forward, and that's just going to kind of start to hold the stone in place. I personally don't like to see the cradle wires at the back, so I'm just going to readjust those and bend them back out a little bit so this sort of go in line with the rest of the base wires. My frame seemed very wide for some reason, so I'm just basically making it skinnier so that stone sort of snaps more in place, and then we can adjust the shape a bit more. It was also refusing to be straight along the side of the stone, so I'm just very gently applying a little bit of pressure there to press it to the side of that stone. And then we can make that forward V. Just turning to the side, then getting in there and twisting it upwards, because that'll just form a bit of a cradle for the stone. You can see how I'm just supporting it with my finger to get it in position. And what I should have done really was squeeze the front little V's you've just made inwards a bit as well at this point, but I hadn't done. We'll do that later when I'm setting the stone finally. So I went and had some lunch and thought about it a little bit, and I thought, you know what, I really don't like how they're sitting. I've got quite a lot of space above this stone and I wasn't really sure where to go with them, so I'm just basically taking those bail wires back out from the frame again. And you can see how easily this new wire straightens. It's much nicer to work with, and this is from Metal Clays for You. I'm not affiliated with them or anything, they're just my usual supplier for square and half round wire. So I mean, be careful at this point, you don't want to really stretch that weave too much, but it's pretty substantial, so I could go ahead and just keep straightening those wires, making sure they're a bit neater. So I decided to curl this over and round. See, I'm sort of pressing with my finger. And when you're doing both sides, you need to leave yourself a little bit of room. So sometimes you have to go kind of overlap one and then the other to get the curve in place where you're liking it. I've cocked that one up there. It was starting to twist on me. If you can see that on camera, there is a slight twist. Didn't focus very well. Square wire does have a nasty habit of twisting on you, so you just have to keep your eye on it. Having said that, if it does twist, one of the best things to do is continue to twist it and make it into a decorative feature. So now I was happy with that wire. I'm going to sort of cross them over at the front there, and we can just keep adjusting until they're about symmetrical. You see how I kind of curl them around my fingers to put some memory in the wire? You can always bend bits back out again, but I like to put the memory in and then straighten them out again to the side like that. Just gives you that nice curve. If you do have any sort of flat parts or bits you're not happy with, you can very, very gently use metal pliers, but you have to be gentle, otherwise you will mark your wire. I see so many wire weavers with beautiful nails, and I just think that's not my method of doing things. I tend to scratch the wire into the place with my thumbs and my nails, and that's why they're such a mess all the time. I wish I had pretty nails. You might notice when I'm filming I just pause for a minute and think about what I'm going to do. I don't ever plan my designs, they just kind of come to me as I go, depending on how the wire's behaving, how the stone behaves. I think sometimes if you try and plan something, it doesn't always go how you envisaged, and it's disappointing almost, so I just decide to go with it. You might have plans to go with, and that's great, but this is just my method. I'm doing a symmetrical design today for a change, because I normally do a lot of curly swirly ones that will kind of end up on one side. It's just nice to do some symmetrical ones as well for a change. And as always, when I've ever done anything, I tend to use my nylon pliers again to straighten the outer wire, because you're going to probably use that piece for something else in a second. It's always worth just straightening it out until you've decided what to do with it. So I'm happy with that bit, it's looking fairly symmetrical. And I'm going to be sort of limited by how much wire I've got left here, because I wasn't very central when I put my bottom weave in. I'm in a bit of a hurry today, I just want to get some stuff done, because I've got a lady coming tomorrow and she said she wanted some tiger's eye. So yeah, bit of a hurry, but hey. And you never have any tiger's eye when somebody wants some, so I thought I'd better put a few together. So the stone's only sort of semi-set at this point, so it will pop out on you. But I find it's probably easier sometimes to be able to get to your working area. So you will see me take a stone out quite regularly. It just helps you kind of figure out where your design's going to go. And I was happy with that one, so I'll snip it off. I'm about ready for some new snips. These are rubbish, they're starting to be not very sharp at the ends. And again, I'm just very gently kind of pressing and rounding, kind of curling the pliers around to try and make that a pleasing shape rather than just ramming it flat to the wire. You still want a little bit of curve in it, and it just looks prettier. And with the nylons again. If anybody doesn't have nylon pliers, I don't know how on earth they manage to keep their wire under control, because they are by far one of the best and one of the cheapest tools to have in your kit. They're only about £6. So if you haven't got any, I would highly suggest you buy some. I have popped a link in the description of all the tools that I tend to use regularly, so if you want to check that out. I think I was being dyslexic again here and couldn't work out which way it was supposed to go. I got it right the first time. So I'm just going to adjust that again and come round. I am genuinely dyslexic, by the way, so my left and my right is a bit of a struggle for me. Be interesting to hear from anybody else that's dyslexic and see how they get on with their weaves, especially symmetrical ones. It's probably why I do non-symmetrical. It's easier for me. Right, I think I know where I'm going now. Yep, that looks better. So I'm just basically adjusting those curves really gently. So if you grip with those particular pliers, they will literally chew the wire. They are quite sharp, but I love them. I think they're really neat and you can get in those all awkward little spaces. They are a really good plier. You just have to learn to press very gently, and if the wire doesn't give, don't force it, because that's when you will mark your wire. Just do it in little tiny weeny bits, and that's when you'll get better at not marking your wire. Because trust me, we all crush wire. I do later on, I think, in this one. It might be the other one I filmed today, but yeah, I do have to go in with my nail file and buff something out later on. So little press, turn it round, little press, and that's the first bit done. Very pretty. So let's pop that stone back in again. You may find this quite tedious, you might not need to do this, but I like to just keep checking and make sure it's going to fit. Nothing worse than making a frame and then the sodding stone won't fit later on. And this does happen. Sometimes you need to just swap your stone over. I've done that many a time, or I've just made a wrap and I didn't like it with that particular stone. There's nothing to stop you changing the stone. This, obviously it's a teardrop shape, it'll fit quite a lot of other teardrop shapes, so if you're not liking it, there's no harm in changing it. But I particularly wanted to set this tiger's eye, so I just made a few more adjustments to try and just make it feel a bit more secure for me. And it's also just worth every now and again checking that those 3 wires are still lined up, because they do have a nasty habit of crossing over on you. So, who shall we choose next? Trying to decide what I wanted. I quite like a curly idea, but I quite like to put a bead somewhere too, so I'm just trying to decide what to do. So I decided to go with these ones, which I think are the back bail wires. I'll be able to tell you in a second. And I'm just going to follow them round so they kind of match. And move, yes, it was the back bail wire. So move the other ones that were the very front base wire, and you can again cross them over each other to get the initial curve, so you've got a little bit of memory, and then you can start adjusting and getting them where you want them. I just felt like they needed to come up the side of the bail a little bit more, and this one wasn't as straight as the other one, so I'm just going to kind of fiddle with it until it's correct. So that needed to pull quite a lot further over, so I'm just going to straighten out again with my my nylon pliers. So I was right, it was this video, so I have crushed the wire a little bit there. So I've just got one of these sponge nail buffers that's 100 grit on one side and 180 on the other. So I'm just using the 100 grit initially just to kind of get rid of that ding. As it happens, it will sit to the inside, so it didn't really matter too much, but I just wanted to get rid of it anyway, just to be on the safe side. It's not very easy to get in there when the wire's in place always. You might end up filing everything that you don't want to file, so if you can get out any problems, do them as you go. I think that's sitting a little bit better at the top, and I did want to put a bead in, like I said, so I'm going to grab a little 3mm copper bead. These aren't very easy to find if you want pure copper. I think I bought these from Imbarley Crafts, which is another wire weaver, and she's on Etsy. I might be wrong, but I'm sure I've had some from her before. So it's nice to support another artist if you can. And because these are pure copper, they will oxidise if that's what you choose to do at the end. If you buy copper coloured beads, they won't, and they won't match the rest of the piece. So I grabbed a short piece of 0.4 weaving wire again. It was probably only about 6 inches long or so. I'm just going to wrap round 3 times and snip off the little end. And I made this difficult for myself here because I didn't know how long I was going to need this to be. I was kind of playing. So I push it all the way down, and then because it kind of, you'll see in a second, I'll come back onto screen. There we go. Because it was right at the top there and it wasn't going to sit quite in the right position, I did have to do a few more wraps. So although I'm fiddling about, I did only do 5 at the top here. So there we go, you can see I've done 5 and they sort of sit to the front there. And then we're going to grab our little bead. Now these do have quite big holes, which is really good because it means you can put them on either thicker wire or you can double the wire through, which we'll do in a second. So I'm going to let that sit right to the bottom, and then I'm going to go around the opposite wire but lower down. It doesn't matter, it's not focusing at all here, it'll come back into focus in a second. So now you can almost see what I'm doing. I'm putting 5 loops on the bottom of the other wire because you're never going to be able to go back up where the other loops sit on the opposite side. It's not physically going to happen. So what I tend to do is I'll do one lot one way like this, and then in a second I'm going to do another set to go back through the bead. So we'll get in there and snip that little weaving wire tail off and secure it, make sure there's nothing sharp that could catch on clothing. And then again, I made it really hard for myself here. I should have put it through the bead first, but I didn't. I wove it through the top here. And again, I'm going to do 5 wraps around the top. So if you're doing this, put it through the bead first, because I just made it really difficult for myself here. If you've got a tricky bit of wire to kind of get in here, like this one, try not to put a harsh bend in it anyway. You can see I'm rolling it through and trying to keep it as circular as I can, because then it won't kink on you. Once you get a couple of wraps down, they do tend to stabilise and it's a little bit easier. So here I'm farting about. I grabbed the other end, which I hadn't put through the bead and should have done, so I kind of had to get that back out again, which made it very complicated. So you can ignore this little part if you did the correct thing and put it through the bead initially. So I had to straighten it out, obviously, because it's a bit of a mess. So now we can head through the bead, which you shouldn't have to do. See how much fun I'm having? Ugh, do you know, I do wonder about myself sometimes. So I'm just going to squash all those weaves together just so they look as one. And they're just about behaving. I sort of considered putting it through and over the wires through the bead, and then decided against it here, so I've just gone as normal round that outside wire another 5 times. Just readjusting the shape again because that sort of left side felt like it had slipped slightly. Right, that's our little bead in place. That's sitting quite nicely. Do just want to try and press those together, and now we can get rid of those little weaving wire tails. It's important to make sure those aren't sharp at all because they will catch on clothing, and obviously you don't want it to pull out of shape if that happens. So let's think about where these ones are going to sit now. I decided they were just going to sort of follow the previous ones but go inside them, and then we're going to come around and literally just follow the previous ones. So just take your time and check you've got them in the right position. When you're doing a symmetrical design, it's quite important because if anything is off, it draws the eye and it does look a bit of a mess. So let's finalise these wires then. We're going to go around the outside of that previous curve and then drop in below. So you need to kind of curl it round to the front there to get that wire in. I like to put my curve in first so that you've kind of got some memory in the wire, like I keep saying. And then it's just easier that way for me. It's just something I've discovered as I've gone along. I couldn't decide whether to do a little loop or not, but I decided not to, so I'm just going to come in there and get that shape adjusted. I decided to work on the other one before I fastened it off as well, just to make sure they were exactly the same. So I'd quite like that bottom loop to just be a little bit bigger than the previous one. I I think that looked a little bit nicer. I just decided to remove the stone at this point, so it's just a little bit easier to get in there and snip those tail ends off. It's also better for your stone because you're less likely to scratch it. So another quick test fit, make sure that sits neatly where I wanted it. Yep, happy with that. And we'll just finalise that other one to match. You'll probably notice I take quite a lot of trouble making sure everything is as symmetrical as I can possibly get it. It's quite nice to see a little bit of quirk in something handmade because it shows it is handmade, but I do like to do my best to get them as symmetrical as they're. So what are we going to do with the last ones then? I'm just having a bit of a fiddle here and thinking, right, how's this going to go? So I'm going to kind of go backwards a bit and then up and round. Let's see, I don't want to cover that weave too much, but I would like to kind of make a bit of a loopy thing. Let's see. Do we like that? Might just come a little bit shallower so the loop's not quite as big. Let's do the other side as well and see what it looks like. Okay, yeah, so a bit smaller, so the loop's just that little bit neater, and you can still see the weave, you can still see the bead, and it's a bit like a little hearty shape almost at the top there. Yeah, that's going to be pretty when it's oxidised because you'll see all those curls. If you don't know how to oxidise and polish, I do have another video which I'll link below for you. I just like to oxidise because I think copper tarnishes anyway, so you might as well oxidise it and make it look really pretty from a sale point of view. Because otherwise when it tarnishes it just gives like a weird orange colour and it's not very pretty, whereas I like the antique look of oxidised copper. That's looking pretty, so we're just on to the last one then. Same again, holding it in place and curling it under. I like to make these loops not really pressed tight to the frame, so I maybe cut a tiny smidge off longer than usual so I can kind of roll these in. It just makes a nicer finish on the outside. You can see how I kind of press the end, just the end in and roll it in. If you press too tight it'll pop back off the frame, so you just want it to kind of place it nicely. And there she is, all ready for oxidising and polishing. Make sure my stone's fairly set. It felt quite secure by the time I'd fiddled about with it. Just going to go in and just straighten anything that needs straightening. And I shall be back in a bit to show you the finished result. So here she is. She's been oxidised and polished and been through the rock tumbler with some stainless steel shot, and that just basically work hardens the metal and makes her all nice and shiny. So this one's now ready for sale. And that's available on my website at www.dreamweaverjewellery.co.uk. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If you could also like and subscribe, that really helps my channel grow and means I can keep bringing you some more free tutorials. If there's anything you'd like me to try and demonstrate, do leave me a comment below and let me know. And also, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below as well, and I will do my best to answer them. Bye for now!